You've been lied to about discipline. They told you it's about willpower, about grinding harder, about waking up at 5 a.m. and cold plunges and all that performative nonsense you see on social media. But real discipline? The kind that makes people physically uncomfortable in your presence? That's something entirely different. That's about becoming so internally controlled, so utterly self-governed, that you start operating on a frequency most people can't even perceive. And when they sense it, when they feel that gap between your reality and theirs, it triggers something primal in them. Disgust, fear, resentment. Because you've become living proof of everything they're not willing to do. Here's what's at stake if you keep following the mainstream advice on discipline. You'll become one of those people who talks endlessly about their morning routine, their productivity hacks, their new planner system, while accomplishing absolutely nothing of substance. You'll be the person who needs external validation for every small win, posting your gym session or your healthy meal like a trained seal begging for applause. Meanwhile, the truly disciplined are moving in silence, building empires while you're building an Instagram aesthetic. The gap between you and them widens every single day. They're playing chess while you're still learning checkers, and you don't even realize the game has changed. Your entire life becomes this performance of discipline rather than the practice of it. And by the time you figure out the difference, you've wasted decades on the wrong path. Now, you'll be that 50-year-old still talking about the book you're going to write, the business you're going to start, the person you're going to become, while nursing quiet bitterness toward everyone who actually did it. The first thing you need to understand is that discipline is not a virtue. Let me repeat that, because it contradicts everything you've been taught. Discipline is not inherently good. It's a tool, a mechanism, a technology of the self. The Nazis had discipline. Serial killers have discipline. Every tyrant in history possessed enormous self-control in service of monstrous ends. So when people sense extreme discipline in you, part of their discomfort comes from this unconscious recognition that you've developed a capability that could be pointed in any direction. You've removed your own internal restraints. And that makes you unpredictable, dangerous even. Most people live within the safe boundaries of their immediate impulses and social conditioning. They do what feels good, what their peer group validates, what requires minimal resistance to the path of least resistance. But you've developed the ability to override all of that. You can sit with discomfort indefinitely. You can delay gratification for years. You can maintain focus on objectives that won't pay off until long after everyone else has quit. This puts you in a different category of human being entirely. But here's where it gets darker. True discipline requires you to become intimately familiar with your own capacity for self-deception. You have to develop a kind of internal surveillance state where you're constantly monitoring your own thoughts, catching yourself in the act of rationalization, destroying your own excuses before they fully form. This is exhausting. This is why most people can't sustain it. They can't handle being both the prisoner and the guard, both the accused and the judge. But this is exactly what Nietzsche meant when he talked about self-overcoming. You have to become the person who knows all your own tricks, all your patterns of avoidance and justification. And you have to close every single escape route you've historically used. Most people have dozens of psychological exits they use when things get hard. You need to seal all of them, brick them up, make it so the only way out is through. And when people interact with someone who has done this, they sense it immediately. They sense that you're not like them. You don't have the same escape hatches. You're not running the same mental software. And this creates a kind of uncanny valley effect in human interaction. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in practice. Imagine you've committed to a major goal, something that requires daily effort for years. Most people approach this with enthusiasm at first. Then their commitment follows a predictable decay curve as the novelty wears off. But someone with true discipline doesn't experience this curve the same way. They've already anticipated it. They've already built systems that account for motivation fluctuating. They continue with identical intensity on day 300 as they had on day 3. Not because they feel like it, but because the decision has already been made and isn't up for daily renegotiation. When colleagues or friends see this kind of consistency, it's disturbing to them. because it reveals that their own relationship to commitment is fundamentally transactional and feeling-based. You've removed feelings from the equation, and that seems almost inhuman to people who are governed entirely by their emotional weather patterns. Now here's something nobody wants to acknowledge about developing this level of discipline. It requires you to become comfortable with being disliked. Not just disliked, but misunderstood in fundamental ways. People will call you obsessed, extreme, unbalanced. They'll express concern for your well-being while secretly feeling threatened by your commitment. They'll invite you to relax, to live a little, to stop being so intense. And these invitations are not benevolent. They're attempts to pull you back down into the comfortable mediocrity where they reside. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He knew that the crowd always resents the exceptional, that there's a kind of democratic impulse to enforce average outcomes on everyone. Your discipline is a reproach to their lack of it. And they will try to neutralize this reproach by convincing you that you're the one with the problem. You have to develop immunity to this social pressure. You have to be willing to be the villain in other people's stories about why they're not succeeding. But it gets even more complex because you also have to avoid the trap of performing discipline for an audience. This is where most people who think they're disciplined actually fail. They've just replaced one form of validation seeking with another. Instead of seeking approval for being fun or likable, they're seeking approval for being disciplined. They still need the audience. They still need the recognition. True discipline is completely invisible to others because it's not being done for them. It's a private relationship between you and your future self, between who you are and who you're becoming. When people sense this kind of discipline, they can't quite put their finger on what's different about you. You're not posting about it. You're not talking about it. You're just consistently, quietly, relentlessly different from who you were yesterday. And this consistency without need for recognition is alien to most people. It suggests a level of internal validation and self-sufficiency that threatens the entire social economy of approval-seeking they participate in. Let me take you deeper into the psychology here. When you become truly disciplined, that you stop participating in certain social rituals that bond people together through shared weakness, the commiseration about how hard it is to wake up early, the bonding over procrastination, the mutual excuse-making, the celebration of tiny accomplishments, all of these small moments of solidarity through struggle. You're no longer available for these rituals because you've moved beyond them. Not because you think you're better, but because these patterns of behavior no longer exist in your reality. And when you're not available for this kind of bonding, people register it as a form of rejection, even though you haven't rejected anything. You've just evolved past the need for it. This creates social friction that you have to be prepared to accept as the price of admission to a different level of functioning. There's also this uncomfortable truth about discipline that involves a kind of violence against your former self. Every day, you're killing the person who wants to sleep in, who wants to quit, who wants to take the easy path. You're engaged in continuous psychological warfare against your own weakness, and this creates a certain hardness in you that people can sense. It's not cruelty toward others. It's the residue of being ruthless with yourself. And most people are so gentle with themselves, so endlessly forgiving of their own failures, that they can't comprehend this level of internal severity. When they encounter it in you, it makes them uncomfortable because it suggests a standard they're not willing to meet. Your very existence becomes a challenge to their self-conception as someone who's trying their best, because next to you, now their best looks like casual effort. Here's another dimension that makes people uncomfortable. Truly disciplined individuals have often reorganized their entire value system around delayed gratification to such an extent that they no longer experience temptation the way normal people do. The sacrifice doesn't feel like sacrifice anymore. Choosing the hard path doesn't require willpower, because the easy path has lost its appeal entirely. You've rewired your reward circuitry at such a fundamental level that what brings other people pleasure might actively repel you. That weekend of drinking and sleeping in that sounds like heaven to your coworkers. It sounds like hell to you, not because you're forcing yourself to feel that way, but because you've genuinely changed what you find rewarding. This radical reorientation of values is deeply unsettling to people who are still operating within conventional reward structures. They can't understand how you're not tempted by the things that tempt them, and they often interpret this as you judging them, even when you're not. Think about the person you're becoming through this process. You're developing the ability to endure discomfort indefinitely, to function optimally under conditions that would break most people, to maintain focus across timescales that exceed most people's planning horizons. These are the characteristics of conquerors, of empire builders, of people who reshape reality rather than adapting to it. And throughout history, people with these characteristics have always made the masses uncomfortable because they represent a kind of human potential that's simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. They prove that the limits most people accept are actually choices, and that's the most threatening revelation of all. Because if your limitations are choices, then you're responsible for them. You can't blame circumstances or genetics or luck. You have to confront the fact that you're exactly as disciplined as you've decided to be. Now let's address something crucial that separates genuine discipline from mere rigidity. True discipline is adaptive. It's not about following the same routine forever, regardless of context. It's about maintaining consistency toward objectives, even as tactics must shift. Most people mistake stubbornness for discipline, and when their rigid system stops working, they collapse entirely. But someone with real discipline can be flexible about methods while remaining inflexible about outcomes. They can adjust their approach daily while never losing sight of the destination. This requires a kind of meta-awareness, the ability to zoom out and assess whether your current behaviors are actually serving your goals, or whether you've just become attached to the behaviors themselves. And this level of strategic thinking, combined with relentless execution, is extremely rare. When people encounter it, they often can't distinguish it from obsession or compulsion because they've never developed the capacity themselves. There's also a dark side to this that needs to be addressed directly. Extreme discipline can become a form of control addiction, a way of managing anxiety about an uncertain world by creating artificial certainty through rigid self-governance. Some people develop discipline not from a place of strength, but from a place of fear. And what looks like admirable self-control is actually a sophisticated coping mechanism for trauma or existential dread. This is the shadow side of discipline that needs to be acknowledged. The question you have to ask yourself is whether your discipline is in service of genuine growth and meaningful objectives, or whether it's a defense mechanism against feeling out of control. Both can look identical from the outside, but they feel very different from the inside, and they lead to very different outcomes over time. But assuming your discipline is authentic and purposeful, what you're really doing is building a kind of psychological capital that most people never accumulate. Every time you override an impulse, every time you choose the hard right over the easy wrong, every time you maintain consistency when you don't feel like it, you're making a deposit into an account that pays compound interest in self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of everything. It's what allows you to make ambitious commitments because you know you'll follow through. It's what allows you to take calculated risks because you trust your ability to handle adverse outcomes. It's what allows you to stand alone when necessary because your relationship with yourself is solid enough that you don't need constant external validation. This level of self-trust radiates from you in ways you don't consciously control. And people pick up on it. They sense that you have a different relationship with yourself than they have with themselves. And if they're honest, they're envious of it. Here's where we reach the apex of understanding what's really happening when people feel uncomfortable around your discipline. They're confronting their own unlived life. Every person carries within them a ghost of who they could have become if they'd made different choices, developed different habits, maintained different standards. Most people have made peace with this ghost, or at least buried it deep enough that they don't have to look at it regularly. But then you show up, and your presence resurrects that ghost. You're living proof that the transformation they gave up on was actually possible. You've done what they told themselves was unrealistic, unsustainable, and not worth the sacrifice. And now they have to either radically revise their self-narrative or find a way to dismiss and diminish what you've accomplished. Most people choose the latter because it's psychologically easier. They'll say you're lucky or obsessed, or that you must have some unfair advantage. Anything to avoid confronting the fact that the primary difference between you and them is that you were willing to pay a price they weren't. This is the ultimate realization about discipline that changes everything. It's not about talent or intelligence or resources. It's about your willingness to endure the specific flavor of discomfort required for your particular goals, day after day after day, long after it stops being novel or exciting or validated by anyone else. Most people can do hard things when they're motivated, or when there's an audience, when success feels imminent. But can you do the hard thing on a random Tuesday when you're tired and nobody's watching and success feels impossibly far away? Can you do it for the 1,000th time with the same attention and effort you brought to the first time? This is what separates the truly disciplined from everyone else. And when you develop this capacity, you transcend the normal human operating system. You become something else entirely, not better or worse morally, but functionally different in a way that's immediately perceptible to others. So what do you do with this information? You make a choice. You decide whether you're willing to become the kind of person who makes others uncomfortable simply by existing at a different level of internal governance. You decide whether you're willing to sacrifice easy social bonds, constant validation, and comfortable mediocrity in exchange for the compound returns of relentless self-discipline. You decide whether you're willing to be misunderstood, labeled as extreme, and excluded from the mutual excuse-making that passes for camaraderie in most social environments. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. The discomfort people feel around your discipline is not your problem to solve. It's information. It's feedback that you're operating at a frequency that most people can't match, and that's exactly where you need to be if you're committed to excellence. Their discomfort is the price of your transformation, and it's a price you should be willing to pay without guilt or hesitation. Subscribe if you're ready to embrace what most people spend their entire lives running from. The truth is, you already know whether you have what it takes. The question is whether you're finally ready to stop lying to yourself about it.